Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. This is going to be the first video of the new year, as well as my first video on my brand new PC. Please let me know in the comments if you think you can tell a difference in the quality. I think you should be able to. Now, this week's Rseat is kind of a wild one. It's hard tires, Group 3, Monza with custom slips, so it's pretty chaotic. Let's get into it. For the very first time ever, the anti-meta car of the week is the Group 3 Dodge Viper. It's got incredible grip and acceleration coming out of corners, it's got enough power to make passes on even the meta car, and it's pretty loose, but that means it handles surprisingly well. This car is by no means easy to drive, however, so be very patient with yourself as you're trying to learn this car. It's taken me quite a while to do anything with it. Like I mentioned before, this car is very difficult for me to drive. I managed to get a 47.1, but my optimal was a 46.9. There are a few different examples of it in the top 100, and there is a pretty good mix of cars, but you can see that the Nismo, the Genesis, and the M6 are all very fast. I think the Genesis is the meta car. As we're approaching the first braking zone, I want to take the chance to mention that you should be shifting at about 80% of the digital attack. I want you to pay attention to when I shift. You're going to wait all the way until you get to the 150 meter board to hit the brakes. You're going to brake very hard in a completely straight line until you get to the 50 meter board, in which case you can start just gently turning in, trying to continue bleeding off speed until you get right all the way up to the corner. You're going to come all the way off the brakes, cut it as much as you can, and you're going to aim for this little tire mark right here. I like to get the middle of my car to the center of that tire mark there on the right where it begins, but I only managed to get the right side of my car. As long as you keep speed up between by hitting that throttle in between the two corners, and you completely miss that big sausage curb on the left, then you should be fine as long as you're very gentle on the throttle and you hook up the tires as soon as you can. You do want to exit in second gear. Notice that I'm gradually adding throttle and I'm making sure that I don't slide whatsoever. Any kind of slide here is going to be very detrimental to your top speed at the end of this full throttle section. Since I did rush the transition between the first right and the first left, I actually left about an entire tenth on the table. You can go much faster through here. Again, I hope you're paying attention to exactly when I shift. Your next braking zone marker is a little bit harder to see. Right after the 150 meter mark is this red mark on the edge of the barrier right here, and right then you're going to hit the brakes, maybe just a little bit before. Once again, the 50 meter board is a good place to turn in. I actually turned in a little bit late and I completely missed the apex here. I lost another tenth, if not 2/10 in this section. How you negotiate it is still the same though. You want to continue steering to the left so that when you turn to the right, you can get fully on the throttle in second gear, shifting up to third, but getting fully on the throttle in one smooth motion. Going slower through the left-hander so you can get on the throttle earlier for the right-hander is recommended. Your next braking point is directly after the 50 meter board right here. You don't want to brake all the way. You want to brake just enough that you can get the front tires to bite, and you want to downshift to third gear. You're going to look for this little access road. Actually, I'm not sure if it's an access road, but it's a little bit of concrete in the middle of the grass, and that is when you want to get back on the throttle in fourth gear. You want to avoid going out on the green on the left, but if you do hit it just a little bit, you should be fine as long as you don't lose too much momentum and slide. Our next braking zone is the opposite of the last one. It's right before the 50 meter board. Once again, we're going to try to quickly get down to third gear, use just as much of this inside curbing as you possibly can, and then get back up to fourth gear. Like always, you want to get on that throttle at the apex. For a corner with a very long full throttle section afterwards, it is sometimes beneficial to slow down early and then get on that throttle early as well. I mentioned this a few different times, but you definitely want to shift right where I'm shifting. If you rev it out, you're actually going to lose momentum. After this next 150 meter board is the sign that spans all the way across the track, and at this access road directly after that is when you're going to hit the brakes. You only need to get down to fourth gear, but it's very important that you're coming off the brakes as soon as you start turning in because you need to free up those front tires. I'm going to pause it right here so you can see exactly how much of the curb you can go over. Continue steering to the left as you add throttle, eventually getting to full throttle before switching directions right about where these tire marks get really dark. Switch directions before then lifting off the throttle, and I'm going to pause it right here so you can see how much of the curb I'm using and how much I'm coming off the throttle. Once you're pointed just to the right of the final corner, you're going to get back on the throttle and make sure that you're steering to the left before you hit it. You also want to track all the way out so you can use all of that curbing, but of course come back on the main track so that you don't go over that white line. Approaching the final braking zone, you're going to have to be very brave, and it's going to feel like your car might slide out, but it's up to you to really balance the brakes and make sure that you don't slide out. Looking for the 100 meter board on the left, you're going to hit the brakes right after that. You can start turning in a little bit after the 50-meter board, but when you get down to third gear, that's when you want to come off the brakes as quick as you can without sliding, and then add a lot of steering. This white spot in the distance is approximately where the access road on the right is, and you want to be fully on the throttle before you get to that access road. Too much steering or getting on the throttle too quickly is going to cause the car to understeer, and you want to avoid that at all costs. You will not get that front grip back. Stay tight to the inside to make sure that you're going the least amount of distance possible, and if you're absolutely sure that lap was good, then you can actually go all the way up to the wall. Like any corner where you're going really fast and you need to decelerate quite a lot, especially these really slow corners, it's really important that you wait as long as you can to turn in. However, you can start turning in just a little bit so that when you fully come off the brakes, you're going to have a little bit more rotation. Now, I actually came off the brakes too quickly, and that's why I didn't get my car as far to the right, and that's why it took me so long to get back on the throttle, but it wasn't bad enough for me to want to restart. It did cost me an entire tenth, though. For the next braking zone, it's going to feel like you're understeering quite a bit. You've got to really release the brakes before the car is going to start turning in. That doesn't mean you can't start turning in before fully releasing the brakes, because Gran Turismo's magic ABS does seem to work, but I really waited too long to turn in right there, and that's why I understeered past the apex. You can turn in earlier and then come off the brakes a little bit, and the car should bite. For this right-hander, I didn't do it as smooth as I possibly could, but I did get to the point where I can get on the throttle really early, and that did end up faster than my last fast lap. For that right-hander that we just did, you'll notice that I got on the throttle before I hit the apex. If you can, without losing too much momentum, get on the throttle earlier than you technically should, then you will be on full throttle for a lot longer. You're essentially extending the length of the full throttle zone, and that can be beneficial as long as you don't lose too much momentum through the initial corner. For that final sector, Ascari, the one that we just went through, it's more important to stay on the line than it is to try to squeeze as much throttle as you can. Stay as tight as you possibly can and make sure you get on that throttle as early as possible without coming off. If I waited a little bit longer to turn in and I came off the brakes slightly quicker without sliding, then I could have gotten the car to rotate a little bit faster, which would have meant that I can get on the throttle quicker, and so I could have found more time there too. I think I lost probably a solid 2/10, if not 3/10 throughout this lap. If you couldn't tell by what I've said about both this car and my lap, I'm not actually very happy with my qualifying lap. I really wanted to get a 46, and I know it's within my capabilities to do so. On top of that, I had to do one of these races at a very strange time, so it was actually very early over in the region that I was racing in EMEA, and so there were not a lot of A+ drivers at all. The only reason I mention this is because it became a little bit too dangerous to use the strategy that I would have used if it were in a more competitive lobby. This is that type of race where you just have to go in the pits, you don't have to do anything with the fuel or the tires, and it's in fact not even recommended to take tires because we are on hard tires, so you're not really going to experience much tire wear at all. With the vast majority of tracks, what we'd want to do is just pit when there would be no one else going in the pits. So since we're starting from the back, usually that is just pitting after lap 1. But since this track features such incredibly long straightaways and full throttle sections, it's actually in your benefit to find someone that you can bump draft with. If you're not familiar with bump drafting, it's when you and another car are both on the straights and you are using the slipstream to go faster right behind them, and you actually push them down the straight. Working with someone in that manner can actually cause you to go probably a full second faster than if you're by yourself. Now, T1 here is always really, really sketchy. I anticipated that, and I think it's unfortunately why that guy braked so late and ran into everyone, because I put myself in the inside. I was just trying to look for exactly when I needed to brake, as well as position myself so if someone behind me didn't want to hit the brakes, then they wouldn't hit me. And that was just Der Adler, and I never had any issues with him. It's just instinct to go to the inside right there. But I do kind of feel bad that that guy dove on the inside. I think it's because he overreacted to my positioning. Moscofi also almost pushed me entirely off the track, which is why I lost track position there. I don't think he meant to do it. I think it was more clumsiness than deliberate. But either way, I was very happy that I stayed on the track. And since this race is pretty long, it's your normal average race seat length, I knew that I had a chance to recover, so I wasn't really upset. At this point of the race, I hadn't quite yet decided that I was going to go for an alternate strategy. I was still planning to try to find someone that I could carefully slipstream with, but I wasn't quite sure if I was going to be able to find that person. Now you may notice here that I came off the throttle and got on the brakes lightly way before I usually would need to, and that's because you have what is known as overspeed when you've been sitting in someone's slipstream for a long time. The genesis that we've been following is the meta car, and it is very fast. And on top of that, it also had slipstream from cars in front of it. So that meant that I was going to be going very fast, they were going to be going fast, and the chance of people hitting each other was going to be very high. As you can see, being extra careful also netted us a bunch of different positions because not everyone in front was being very careful. And because of that, I realized that I might not be able to find someone I'd be able to carefully slipstream with. So I was going to go in the pits regardless of whether this GTR was going to or not. I'm going to leave this pit stop in its entirety. One, because I want to mention that since it's a GTR, it's really important to know a lot about your opponent's cars, and the GTR lacks top speed when it doesn't have slipstream. Since he went in by himself and I was following him in, it meant that he was not going to have a lot of speed, especially compared to me in the Viper behind him. But for some reason, he ended up behind me. Now, I'm not quite sure if that's just because I had more speed going in, or he might have actually taken tires or forgotten to hit that button. You'll notice that I skipped through tires and I skipped through fuel really quickly. And I think it's really important to make sure that you do that every time you go into the pits in this race, because if you accidentally take tires or if you start the animation for fuel, you're going to cost yourself precious time, and you do not want to do that. Now, like I mentioned before, this is not the optimal strategy for this race. It's really important, like I've mentioned in the past, to find people that you trust that you're racing with. And unfortunately, I didn't actually know anyone in this lobby. I think I'd raced with a couple of them before, but I didn't really know any of them well enough to know if I could trust them to be a slipstream partner or not. So I thought that it was going to be much better for me just to drive on my own. In fact, I think most of the drivers were actually A or even B drivers, and I couldn't really find a lobby with more competitive people, so I did think it was probably going to be in my best interest to just drive completely by myself and essentially turn it into successive hot laps, just going as fast as I possibly can, as consistently as I could, and it kind of worked out. Jumping to lap 4, you can see that I did have the fastest lap, and I was indeed catching up to all the people ahead of me who had not quite pit yet. When you're driving completely by yourself in these races, it's important to try to just mimic exactly what you're doing for your qualifying lap as much as you can, but of course there are going to be a few different factors that will affect it. Now, tire wear is going to be on in the race, and it's not going to be on in the qualifying lap. And fuel weight, as well as changes in both of those things, are going to affect how the car behaves. So it's one thing to know the choreography for exactly how you want to do your laps, but it's another thing to anticipate and adjust based on the aforementioned things. We've also talked about overspeed from slipstream, and you do have to contend with a little bit of dirty air, but we have custom slipstream on this week, so the dirty air effect is a lot less than other weeks. When you have normal slipstream, when it's just at weak or realistic, then dirty air is going to be a lot worse, so you have to be much more careful during those weeks. If you do find yourself passing someone, it's very important that you don't make mistakes like I just did right there, because it's going to definitely cost you in the end. Even though I was able to get back on and I had an okay exit there, he was so close that it was going to be inevitable that he was going to use my slipstream and he was going to have the opportunity to pull off a pass. Now, I can't criticize this guy for trying to pass me, but I do want to say that it's not exactly the best idea. I wanted to do everything I could to stay ahead of him, so I braked late, and that caused me to oversteer, but I was able to get back on the line, get on the throttle, and then slot in right behind him. Now, best case scenario is he passes me there, and that's going to put him in a position where I can then pass him. He also made a mistake when trying to do that and gave himself a penalty. Now, I didn't realize this, but he hadn't taken a pit yet, so when I went for the pass, it really was kind of unnecessary on my part. I positioned myself not exactly to pass him, but just in case he braked early, I didn't want to have to accidentally run into him or turn off track. So I was very glad that I did do that. And in the end, when he spent all that time trying to pass me instead of just waiting and bump drafting, not only did he give himself a penalty, he also cost us a lot of precious time. It can also be argued that I cost us a lot of time because I made that big mistake and then he was forced to try to pull off a pass or just sit behind me. But in the end, if you pass at Ascari, the place that he passed me at, then I'm just going to have the opportunity to pass him because of slipstream before and after the final corner, which used to be called Parabolica. If we find ourselves in a situation where we're just passing each other each corner, then it's going to end up being really bad for overall pace, and we're probably both going to end up losing a position once the pit cycle finishes. Now, I was very happy that he did go in the pit, and of course, like I said, I'm not mad at him for trying to pass, but it really is not strategically sound. Even though I made that mistake, if he was paying any attention, he probably noticed that I was faster than him, and even if not, it's just not a good idea to pass at Ascari right there, unless you know for a fact that you are multiple seconds faster than the person that you're passing. Jumping to the end of that lap, you can see that I'm about to approach someone who's coming out of the pits. This is someone who was much further ahead when I went into the pits, And because I had cleaner laps or just better overall pace, I was able to catch him once the pit cycle ended. Now you'll see as we get through this corner, he was giving me space on the entry, and as he was exiting, he actually turned on his hazards, which is kind of like, sorry, I'm in the way. I didn't mean to. This is the kind of thing that happens, and he, of course, gave me more space on the outside too. And I did have a better exit, and I also had slipstream for just a second, so I was able to get all the way ahead of him going into the braking zone. He didn't put up much of a fight. I don't know if he just anticipated that I'd be going faster or if he just didn't want to ruin both of our pace, but it is, of course, definitely a good idea to not battle too much, do as little as you can, and I think if it ended up being a situation where I'm ahead of him and he realizes that he's faster than me, then he could pull off a pass, but he wasn't really trying. He didn't kind of defend. He just let me do my thing. He even put on his hazards as a bit of an apology, and it became pretty clear that I was much faster, so that was that. If you go back to the situation with the last driver, you'll see how incredibly detrimental to my overall pace it was right about now. You'll see that I am 1.4 seconds slower than the lap that I had just done, and that's just because I came upon that guy in the braking zone when he was coming out of the pits. I had already cost myself something like 2 seconds on that lap where I did have to try to pass and then defend against that guy, and I just lost another 1.5 seconds right here. So we can see that that is 3.5 seconds of wasted time, and we're going to look at that number when we get to the end of the race. As we start the final lap, you can see exactly how powerful it is to just have clean air and be able to run your own pace, because I passed everyone except the fastest 2 guys without having to pass almost anyone on the track itself. Now, we had just done the math, and we knew that we had lost about 3.5 seconds from the mistake that I made. That one little mistake that I made, and then the guy trying to pass me, it ended up making it so I wasn't in first place now. Now, we don't know exactly what it did to his race, but we know that I'm a faster driver, and on top of that, he had a half-second penalty, which of course adds up to much more than a half second, so he potentially lost multiple positions. Again, this isn't a criticism of him going for that pass. I understand wanting to pass people in almost any situation, but passing an Ascari just isn't the right move, and he paid for it pretty dearly, and I paid for it by giving up a potential win here. That was also just a single interaction. Now, imagine how much time you save, and you can actually see it by the fact that I passed multiple people when they were just in the pits, but imagine how much time you save by just not battling. Now, the right way to approach Ascari is to slow yourself down and make sure you get just the best possible exit that you can. Not only are you going to have more momentum coming out if you can pull off a really good exit, but you're also going to have the slipstream, and as you can see, that's going to put me in a position to make a pass before the final corner. And we talk about knowing opponents' cars, and I can tell you that the GTR handles a lot better, but this car has much more power, and since I was on the outside, I can actually keep up more momentum. So I kept up more momentum, got on the throttle a little bit earlier, and that netted us one more position. I have to reiterate that I am not mad at that guy that pulled off that pass, but it is something to consider if you are thinking about pulling off a pass, especially a pass in a weird position. You definitely have to think about the entirety of the race and how much each action is going to cost you. Starting all the way near the back, I think in 15th place, and then ending up in 2nd place is definitely not a bad way to go. I do wish that I was able to show you what it's like when you bump draft with a partner, and in fact, if you tune in later today, I will be live streaming this race, so you can see exactly what it's like when you're racing in a more competitive race. As always, thank you very much for watching my video. If you liked what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'm going to be leaving you with a look at my current members. I love every one of you. Thank you very much.